Help protect us from racism and xenophobia by becoming an I Love Black People ambassador today. Join on iloveblackpeople.com. No matter where you are in the world, join us today and get access to the I Love Black People network. Special thanks to Banneker Communities.
Greetings and welcome to another edition of I Love Black People. Welcome to all the wonderful listeners that have joined us on this journey for some time now, and thank you for your support and continue to reach out and give us your feedback. It's definitely important. You can always reach us at info@iloveblackpeople.com, or you can find us on all the social media out there, and definitely our website, iloveblackpeople.com, for participation in many of the activities that our startup is actively involved in and engaged in. Right now, we're involved in a billboard that we're developing to address the issue of Afrophobia in Johannesburg, South Africa. We also are coming out with our upcoming newest beta version of our global network, Green Book based directory of safe places, Black friendly, throughout the world, and definitely will look forward to you downloading and being a part of that early adoption phase, where we can actually identify these Black friendly spaces in the 8 key categories that we modeled after the original Green Book. And also, if you can go to Amazon and get a copy of our latest edition of the Global Green Book. It's our 4th edition. And again, this is modeled after Victor Green's Green Book, where he originally focused on places to eat, places to sleep, and transportation. We expanded that to include education / childcare, finance, legal, beauty, healthcare, legal care, and the original 3 places to eat, places to sleep, as well as transportation. So with that being said, just our topic today is something that's kind of interesting, kind of more of a fun topic. I know we often talk about some very serious issues that often are facing our community, and those solutions that are helpful in making those things happen. We're going to focus on something, and many of you may know I'm a member of a fraternity, one of these Black Greek letter organizations that were founded most around the turn of the century of the previous century, from I guess was it the Alphas in 1906 and all the way to the Iotas. So I'm a part of that. There's a thing we call a conclave. I'm a Kappa, member of Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated, and our conclave is coming up. And it's coming up is in Tampa, Florida. So that actually brings in some key issues, of course, with some of the very racist and homophobic behavior of their politics and governor down there, anti-human behavior. Many, rightfully so, organizations have boycotted the state. So I think it's important to make sure we're clear that, for all the Black folks that are living under those laws, in the oppressive regime in Florida. And again, when I say repressive, globally as well as throughout the United States, let's be very clear, Black folks are still catching hell, and we need to uplift each other no matter where we are in the world, and protect each other from the harms and humiliations of racism, and we say Afrophobia, of the fear and hate of Black people who are perceived to be of African descent. So with that being said, we have a thing called a conclave, and that's our national convention for Kappa Alpha Psi, and all these Greek letter organizations have them. It's a time where literally members from all over the world, in many instances, come together and they discuss the national organization. Now, I pledged actually at a chapter called Beta Nu, and Beta Nu was founded at Harris Stowe State University, is what it's called now. It was actually Stowe's Teachers College back then, and it's in St. Louis, the city chapter. So it has multiple universities tied to it. And I pledged back in fall of 1989. And in that period of time, it was still lawful to have a pledge process above ground where you had people who were pledges. And I can take it back, again, these organizations were founded, on a model based on the university experiences that were in the predominantly white environment where they had fraternities and they used Greek letters. Now, those of us who are clear know that, a book, Stolen Legacy, really outlines very clearly that the Greeks learned all they understood from the mystery system from Kemet, from Africa. And so when we talk about Greeks, we're really talking about a stolen legacy that's attributed to the students that were taught by the teachers in Africa, and so are wrongly accredited for the knowledge. When, of course, you would never credit the student with the knowledge, you would actually ask who taught the student, and you'd have to turn to Africa for that, where you had libraries that were burnt. Like, if you can imagine that, burning libraries. Like, this is the contribution that Europe in that period of time contributed. Really was a lot of destruction, and the world had literally been developed for thousands of years before Europe woke up and had the opportunity to participate. And when they did, it was very violent. And so oftentimes when people talk about Greek letter or somehow attribute that to scholarly or academia, to the Aristotles and the Socrates, we're clear that they were taught by African people. And so even the names, these Greek letter names, Kappa, Alpha, Psi, most Black folks have no reason to know what these Greek letters are. In everyday life, most people don't even, Black, white, or whatever race, most people don't use Greek letters. So when people see, even my own family members, they would see the K and the A, and the side looks like a candelabra or a pitchfork. So I've had family members say, well, why do you have a pitchfork on there? So, I have to explain that's a psi, and that's a letter in the Greek alphabet. And of course, when we were, online pledging, when it was still legal to pledge, we had to learn the Greek alphabet: Kappa, Alpha, Beta, Gamma, Delta, Epsilon, Zeta, Theta, Iota, Kappa, Alpha, Psi, Delta, Di, Lambda, Mu, Nu, Xi, Omicron, Pi, Rho, Sigma, Tau, Upsilon, Phi, Chi, Psi. Now, and we used to say never say omega. So that's one of those things where, again, you kind of get into some of the childish little behavior that we actively participated in these college fraternities. And I tell people they were college fraternities, not college choirs. So there are unfortunately stigmas and the stereotypes that are attributed to fraternity behavior in college campuses. And some of it's true and some of it's not true. And most of it, at least back in my day, wasn't on video like it's been the era of social media, because if some of that stuff was, it'd be very difficult. But as I was saying with the pledge process, it wasn't until 1990 in St. Louis that collectively fraternities and sororities came together. They called it Pan-Hellenic. And again, this is still a tribute to Greeks. Hellenic is, it's I think it's a Latin word for Greek. If anybody shoot me an email to correct me. But they came together and said that they no longer would have above ground legal pledging, that the process of going through a series of activities prior to being accepted for membership, that those activities would be eliminated. And much of it had to do with a false concept of window of opportunity. Unfortunately, much of these discussions for these fraternities around the issue of hazing, they weren't really done by the experts. They were done by lawyers. And again, this is no offense to folks who run around chasing ambulances or people who stand up and fight injustices. Lawyers actually span a broad range. With that being said, a lot of it was about how to minimize the risk of an exposure for these national organizations. The issue of insurance, self-insurance, Many of the larger white organizations had so much money they self-insured, and the issue was literally how to avoid being sued. And I think one of the problems with that, you know, approach, it never really gets to the real heart of the matter. We're clear that pledging has been against the hazing, excuse me, has been against the law. It's been against the law for over 100 years, of course, in the United States. And some of the earliest hazing, of course, came from military schools and military institutions, as well as trades organizations, where they would put the plebes, or the people who just became a part of, through a process to have them prove themselves. Now, I know, from an Afrocentric point of view, we often talk about rites of passage, where there's more of a natural progression as young people mature. They go through a process to adulthood. Unfortunately, many of these organizations, and much of what these organizations have done, did not come from a structured process that was very consistent throughout the different organizations and chapters. So different places would do different things, and oftentimes, the outcomes were not measured. There was no metric system of trying to say what was actually the best way to bring someone in an organization. But in the original days, again, we sometimes take history out of context. A lot of these organizations started on college campuses. People are transient. They come, they graduate. What happens next? So these organizations were dealing with a lot of structural things that could make it difficult to expand. And again, even college campuses at the time, having organizations that were operating nationally from outside of the university, engaging college students, in itself could be something that was a barrier. Many universities, especially if you notice, like historically Black colleges, there are many of them that aren't the early chapters of these fraternities. So most of the fraternities and sororities, they actually have their nomenclature, their chapters, based on the alphabet of the Greek alphabet. So their first chapter would be called the Alpha chapter, and that's like A in the English alphabet. So and then B would be Beta. So that would be the second chapter. And if you notice, of course, and there's many that were started at Howard University, but most of them weren't. And so when you look at that, it shows you that there was always a body of politics operating at these universities, be it historically or predominantly white institutions, or historically Black. And again, each of these universities had their own culture and their own activities, so that even when you start talking about how members are inducted to the organizations, it wasn't necessarily always a consistent across the board. And even with Kappa Alpha Psi, we have our pledge program was called the Scrollers Club, and it was the name Scrollers Club was accepted in 1919 at our Zeta chapter, Ohio State University. But at that meeting, national meeting, again, conclave, like I said, it was coming up, we called it, they only adopted the name. They didn't adopt a actual process. They adopted like some names and things like, okay, the person in charge will be called Dean of Pledges. And again, these nomenclatures are, I think, again, for an organization spreading across the world or the country, having some consistency in languages is important. But again, you're talking about people who, again, may not even known how big, like there had been fraternities started by Black folks in many regards that never made it past a couple years. Again, we're talking about college campuses, so it's a turnover. So to be able to have a level of consistency in itself was something very difficult. So when you start talking about how they treat people who are now, prospective members, that was also one of the issues. But but the majority of the white institutions, they had pled processes, and much of what we've seen with the historically black colleges, historically black fraternities were the same. And then after the wars, World War I, World War II, a lot of times some of that military type activity was included. And again, we talked about how I said the hazing was something that was a part of military institutions for hundreds of years. So some of the things that were adopted in different schools were people coming back from the war on the GI Bill, what have you, and they would like bring it into the context of these pledge programs. And again, with that being said, the people in 1990, after again changes that had been taking place and us being clear that hazing had already been outlawed, now the pledge process no longer was acceptable because they saw that as the window in which people could be harmed, which would cause the liability to the organizations. But what wasn't present at those meetings and what wasn't used, or expertise that wasn't used, it wasn't the expertise of psychologists, social workers, or sociologists. Again, attending so many of these meetings during that time, those voices weren't heard at all. The main voices, if not the only voices, were those of the lawyers, who would then, of course, look at the legal documents and say, this is how we can minimize our exposure to being sued. In many of these meetings, I didn't hear, we love young black men so much, we don't want them to be hurt. It really was about how to absolve many of these organizations from exposure. And you can see that in the results. And let me just say how interesting it was. I came under a period of process where we legally could be on above ground. And what people don't realize that, not only did that include physical activity, but it included an interesting aspect where you could be depledged. And a lot of people don't talk about that now, since this is no longer how it works. But in those days, if you was online, you became a scroller, and you decided that this Kappa thing ain't for me, you could actually just say, you know what, no, thank you. You wouldn't have been inducted. You wouldn't get all the secret society stuff. You just had an opportunity to be exposed, and you said that's okay. And the same with vice versa. If the fraternity had selected you to be a part of the pledge program, and they realized it just wasn't working out, you're not a good fit, they would actually say thank you, but you can go home. And it was no harm, no foul, because at this point, the whole thing was really a probationary and a review of each other. And in many cases, this is again well before I pledged, people would be in these pledge processes for multiple semesters. The Scroller Club was literally a club. And they had, oftentimes in many universities, their own intramural sports teams and activities. And throughout the course of multiple semesters, a lot of these young folks could actually develop relationships that allowed them to develop a level of fraternalism, brotherhood, and friendship and fellowship that could create a bond. Well, when they started limiting the amount of time people could be on these lines, meaning, okay, it went from multiple semesters to you had to pledge within the context of one semester, and then you had to pledging in the context of 3 months, then 2 months. And what they kept thinking, and these are the lawyers who are definitely not helpful with studying human behavior, they said that we had to shorten the period of time to be exposed to the opportunity for hazing to take place during a pledge process. So therefore, you went from multiple semesters to maybe 1 semester to 3 months to 2 months of the semester to 1 month. And when we came in, I think it was something like 2 plus 2. Is it 2 weeks above ground and a 2-week process where basically you had to be already selected. What happened is young people just, instead of the things they would do naturally over the course of multiple semesters, they tried to increase the activities that they had in a shorter period of time. And they would actually add activities, physical and otherwise, to figure out if that person was the right fit. So if you had multiple semesters to figure out someone's the right fit, you could, through process of elimination, do just that time period, someone say, you know what, this is not for me, I'm tired of it. Or vice versa, we've had enough of you and we're tired of you. But when you start eliminating that to, like, again, from multiple semesters to just one semester to just a few months or a few weeks of that, the things that were done by young people to figure out if someone was the right fit became very, very problematic. And it became even worse with less time because then the activities got heightened in their, you know, frequency and intensity. And these activities, again, oftentimes, for the letter of the law, as the lawyers would say, are illegal. Now, when they did away with pledging, now this is before social media, this is before cell phones, this is like, again, 1990. Okay, so computers ain't really, the internet's not the internet yet. So you're really talking about a time period where communication wasn't as prolific and difficult. So these organizations had made their changes because of the lawyers and risk and avoidance. And so they really didn't have a good process to tell the members at large, hey, this is changing. Now, of course, there were, high profile cases or allegations of hazing. But when it came time to say we're no longer going to do it, there was no like 3-year process to help people understand what the new activities were going to be like. I still remember, these are old days of the overhead projectors and maybe VHS or beta VCRs, but it was very minimum activity to help understand. It wasn't like these organizations went across in a national way at homecomings and gave workshops through to people throughout, young folks throughout the country. It was very limited, and when these new rules were violated, the consequences were they just ended up suspending chapters and driving brothers underground. And I will say this, for those who were in the organizations at the time, it was we really thought that once they said pledging was illegal, many of us thought that young people would just run to the fraternities and just want to wear a t-shirt and just be a part of it no matter what. We were, again, since we didn't have any psychologists or sociologists involved, we didn't understand that literally, even though it was made clear to in these smoke, and we couldn't call them smokers anymore. Again, they changing names instead of addressing behavior. They called them like membership intake and all kinds of names to get away from the old nomenclature without getting to the actual root of it. So at these informations, they would literally have folks from international headquarters and at the regional levels. Okay, no one should do anything. All you need to do is pay your money, take a test, and you too can be a member of this organization. Now, again, many of us thought the floodgates would just like go wide open. The folks just trying to get in while it was free, but not free, with no real process. But what happened, and this is again, if the proper people had been involved, we would have known that there were going to be young people said, "No, look, I want to be made the real way. I want to go old school. I wanted the real way. I wanted to go hard." And you like, whoa. So literally, now let me just say this, for all of us who went through a pledge process while it was still legal and lawful to pledge, again, hazing was always illegal. One of the deterrents that a lot of folks didn't want to go through it was because they was afraid of what pledging was, old school. And I'll be candid, many of us who did go through a pledge process, we kind of have this, it's not a motto, but as long as you did what you was asked to do and you didn't tell on anybody, that's what you do. Everybody had their own process. At every era, like we just said, there was some people who pledged for multiple semesters, multiple months, multiple weeks. As long as you did what you was asked or told to do, most folks say that's how it is. But to think that we would have people come and say, look, I want it the real way. we weren't prepared for that. And it literally created, again, a dynamic socially that, again, with the fact that people didn't want to change that already were in the organization because they saw value in a process. And then those who saw it as a prestige to be a part of something that did have an element of rigor, if you will, that was required. It ended up, making the 90s one of those times where literally lots of young people were called names as renegades, and a lot of chapters were suspended. And what we would also often say is that suspending these chapters didn't hurt the members that were currently, brothers. It actually hurt the folks who wanted to be brothers. There's plenty of folks who've gone through these universities, and especially through the 90s, who wanted to be members, but these chapters were off campus. They were suspended, and it drove a lot of folks to become members of college fraternities after college. Now, I'm not saying what that dynamic is, but in many cases, it started having people look at the college experience very different, especially when the fraternity still was something they could obtain after college. But that being said, there's still and will always be a need for organized Black men in college. And with that being said, thank you for this opportunity to share my little frat story. And as I always started off, always end off with, I am because we are. And I definitely wouldn't be me without the Noops. And with that being said, thank you so much for following us on I Love Black People. Have a great one.
Help protect us from racism and xenophobia by becoming an I Love Black People ambassador today. Join on iloveblackpeople.com. No matter where you are in the world, join us today and get access to the I Love Black People network. Special thanks to Banneker Communities.